I used to do a timeline like this, and we do, let's see, Tyndale, that's pre-King James, and Coverdale, and Great Bible, Bishop's Bible, Geneva Bible. What just fell? And then you had, in 1881, you had the RV, and in 1901, you had the ASV, and in 1952, the RSV, 1963, the New American Standard, 1973, the NIV. And I used to draw this timeline. I don't draw that line anymore because that's not how it is. It's like this. Okay? And these are all down here. And these are all down here. In other words, these were going toward that perfect book. These were coming away from it. And you say, well, how could you dare say that? It's real easy. I told you. I read it. And give you an example, okay? Have you ever heard this about the NIV? The NIV in 2 Samuel chapter 21, verse 19, it says, Elhanan killed the brother of Goliath. And the brother of is in italics. And so the NIV yanks those italics out of there, saying that they were added by the translators, which they were, which they are added by just about every other translator. But anyway, the NIV yanked them out of there, and that did not put a contradiction into the Bible. That put two contradictions into the Bible. That contradicted 2 Samuel chapter 21, saying Elhanan killed Goliath, with 1 Samuel 17 that said David killed Goliath. Oh, thank you very much. And but it also contradicted 2 Samuel chapter 21, where it said Elhanan killed Goliath, with 1 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 5, that's a parallel to 2 Samuel 21, where it very plainly says Elhanan killed the brother of Goliath, and the brother of is not in italics. And so a lot of our guys, they jump all over the NIV for that. Very good. That, they got it from the Geneva. The Geneva. I just broke that. We got one half price here. Anyway, the Geneva didn't have those italics in, and therefore they had the same contradiction. Let me ask you this. Psalm 23, verse 6, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord. You going to do that? Yeah. Me too. Hope you don't have a Geneva. I should dwell in the house of the Lord for a long season. I got news for a bucko. When I get in, nobody's saying, you've been here long enough, your time's up, you can leave. Okay? But this one cracks me up. Malachi chapter 2, verse 16, that's where the Bible says, God hateth putting away. The Geneva says, if thou hatest her, put her away. Oh, wait, there's supposed to be something wrong with that. You know, Geneva really has its strong points, you have to admit. Anyway, so what I compared it with, I'll tell you what I've got. I've got a Wycliffe that's 1320 or 1380. I got a Tyndale. I got a Cranmer's. I got a Great Bible. I got a Geneva 1557, a Geneva 1560, and a Bishop's. And I compared all of those to this so-called 1599. And so you'll see it's a comparison. So that shows you that that the Geneva is it's a good Bible. It's not a wicked Bible, but it's not a perfect Bible. Okay? It's just that simple. This one is called Money is a Defense. That comes out of Ecclesiastes because money is a defense. Okay? And that is just a good book. I hate to use this word because it's such a contradiction to truth. Common sense. Somebody once said, why do they call it common sense when it's so uncommon? But this is just good common sense on taking care of your finances. And so that is back there. This is a study on repentance. I had somebody say, well, repentance is turning from your sin. I said, well, I just read today, I was reading Exodus, that God repented. Yeah. You think God returned from his sin? No, because he never had any sin. But that is one of the best, probably most thorough little Bible studies on repentance that you're going to get. This one, I am not a Calvinist, okay? but I was predestinated from the foundation of the world not to be one. I tried being a Calvinist once, and not being one was irresistible. But back in, I think it was 2000, I want to say 2009 now. Let me tell you, you guys are aware of the contemporary church movement. Now let's call it the contemporary movement. We don't want to call it church. But 2009, I got my eyes open on something, and that is this. The contemporary churches, Reformed theology is moving into contemporary churches, the Calvinism. Here's what I think it is. I think it is very simple that, guys, come on. Every Christian wants to know some Bible. They want to know something about the Bible. And if you're in a church like that where you get no Bible whatsoever, I call Calvinism lazy man's theology, because if you can spell tulip, you think you know the mind of God. And so that vacuum of Bible knowledge in those contemporary churches, what's filling that vacuum is Reformed theology, Calvinism. And so in 2009, I was on a kind of a panel discussion, you call it a debate. They're all Bible believers, but non-Calvinists against Calvinists. This is two-hour DVD, so there's 4 hours on here, and we went head to head with these Calvinists. We won, but it was predestined. But anyway, so that is back there. That's kind of one of those gun ones, or bullet ones, where you can load your gun and answer a Calvinist. This is our English Bible inspired? We have that book out there, and then this is the same book as an audio book. It is the first audio book. I was just talking to our guys down in Cincinnati. Forgot to tell my wife, but Understandable History is now finished as an audio book. So the next book shipment we'll have some of those in there. So if you are not a reader and you like to listen to books, that is it. This is called Living with Pain. This is not the audio book of the book called Living with Pain. Believe it or not, I don't talk about being in pain. I broke my neck when I was in 1973. It was 2 months before the doctors found out. And I went to a chiropractor, and I thought he'd snap my neck and fix me up, and he would have snapped my neck and he killed me. But he found out my neck was broken. And so it was, I'll give you an example. It was August 23rd of 1973 that I fell in a construction accident and broke my neck. It was November 12th of 73 that they did the surgery. But due to that, if you broke your arm or leg and they didn't set it for 80 days, it'd never be the way it should be. And so in 73, they went in here and fused C6 and 7. But by that time, the damage was done, and so the neck is pretty much junk. In 08, they went in over here and took C5 out, ground it to powder, put it back in between 4 and 6, and put a titanium plate. I have a titanium plate in here. I live for the day the Muslims try to cut off my head. I can't wait to see it. And now we're going to cut off your head. I bet you can't. Anyway, and then in 13, they went in back here and did some work on my right arm. And so we got one spot here. We're holding out for more money. This is some very high dollar real estate back here. And believe it or not, I'll tell you what happened. We have a doctor friend. It was one of our young people, and your pastor knows him. And unbeknownst to me, he's a podiatrist. And so he's really at the wrong end to be taking care of my neck. But he gave me MRIs and CAT scan to 4 different neurosurgeons, independent of each other, without me knowing. He said they all handed them back to him and said, there's nothing we can do for this guy. So that's where we live. You say, well, how do you keep on going? I'm going to tell you how we keep on going. I had somebody ask me this in 08. They said, how did you get off, after the surgery, how did you get off being addicted to painkillers? I said, well, it's really easy. I never got addicted to painkillers. I have painkillers. I don't take them very often. Like a 6-month subscription for me lasts about 2 years because I didn't want to get addicted to painkillers. And that is a problem with the vocal cords. They've contracted. They've been partially paralyzed. That's why I do have a problem with them. But I tell people I did get addicted to something, okay? And I'll tell you what I got addicted to. I got addicted to prayer. And that sounds real neat. Ooh, I'm addicted to prayer. Wait a second. Think about this. You get addicted to painkillers, you can find painkillers. You can buy them on a street corner. Some of you taking somebody else's pain medication. You find out, well, they don't need it anymore. You know, my doctor gave this to me, and after 2 weeks, I didn't need it anymore. You want it? Yeah, that's what seems. Look, you can get painkillers somewhere. Let me ask you a question. How can I make somebody pray for me? I can't. You can't buy prayer. You can't buy it. You can't beg it. So, guys, that's why if you don't get anything off the table, if you would take a prayer card, we would appreciate it. It is what keeps my wife and I going. She has shingles in her left eye, cannot see. She has hearing aids. She cannot hear. If you speak to her from behind and she doesn't acknowledge because she doesn't hear. And it's getting worse, her hearing. I know because I have to throw bigger and bigger books at her to get her attention. But she's been to 18 doctors around the world because when we have to go to a doctor, we're in a different state or a different country. I actually went to one in New Zealand. And she just saw her main doctor in Idaho who said she needs a surgery on her eye. You say, guys, how do you keep doing it? This. Yeah. Amen. This is it. I cannot say enough. And I'm not asking you to take a prayer card and promise to pray anything. We look at it like this, guys. If we get onto a Baptist refrigerator, we got like 6 chances a day of getting prayed for. So this, Brother Drummond, you know him. He's a preacher friend of your pastor and I. And I was in his church, and he said, I've got some folks really dealing with pain. One night, I want you to speak about living with pain. This is the single only time it's ever been done that I've ever done it. I don't talk about it. And so that's why it's on the table, because I don't ever want to have to do it again. But see, I think it's just one. No, it's not even one anymore. Yeah, it looks like it's just one CD. But that is a message on living with pain. And if you have a problem with that, or you know somebody has a problem with that, the Living with Pain book. There's 2 books out there. My Living with Pain book will help you with living with pain, and it has a good chapter on salvation if you have a friend that is lost and lives with pain. And then there's one by Brother Bob Murphy, who was a Vietnam vet, went over to Vietnam, got on IV drugs, ended up with hepatitis C, got saved, but his liver never got saved. He got hepatitis. They ended up doing a liver transplant, but he really struggled on for about 2 or 3 years. And I think we published his book. I don't think he was with us 60 days after we got his book done. And that's living with chronic illness. So if you have a chronic illness or a friend with chronic illness, that book is out there. And it also has a very good chapter on salvation. So those are out there, and as your pastor said, and look, you don't feel like you have to go buy anything. You certainly don't. You can feel free just to go buy and leave money. But we'll leave it up. We'll leave it up for about 10 minutes after the service tonight. Then we'll pack it up. Kathy will pack it. I know somebody's going to want to help her, but she does a running inventory. And then after she gets done packing it, if we'd have some guys help me load the truck, because if I loaded the truck, you know, there's a chance I could load it. I got a bad back at the belt line, and there's a chance I could load it and everything be fine. And then there's a chance I grab one box. When we towed a trailer, I pick up a 15-pound stabilizing bar and ended up on crutches for 2 weeks. So that's why I don't pick anything up. It just is a lot easier not to. So if we can get some help, then that would be good. Well, I'm going to talk to you about somebody tonight. You say, you talk about the King James Bible. No, I'm not. No, I'm going to talk to you about somebody, and I'll let you figure out who it is. His mother's name was Mary. His legitimacy was questioned, whether she was really a pure woman having this child. There were attempts made on his life before he was born. There were attempts made on his life after he was born. He was born into a baser kingdom, though he was destined for a higher throne. And although he was a king, he was born in very humble surroundings. A great assembly announced his birth. And he was given gifts of gold at his birth. And he was preceded by a wild man, preacher, by the name of John. And he had 5 letters in his name. You know who it is? James. King James. You say, that's all true about King James? Absolutely. We've been to Scotland several times, been into Edinburgh Castle. He was destined to be a king. He really was. And you know where he was born? In a closet. He was born in a closet. Now the closet, I would say that closet, is about, I'd say coming from this wall over about toward this side of the door. So it's a large closet, a walk-in closet for their day. But that closet is adjoined to a magnificent room. And he was not born in that magnificent room. He was born in this closet. And one of the things that the Bible haters do is they love to jump all over King James. And one of the things they do is they say that he was a homosexual. You know how you know he wasn't homosexual? There's one real easy way. You know how you know he wasn't homosexual? The homosexuals don't claim him. Yeah. You think they wouldn't want to say the king of the King James Bible was one of us? And they never claim him because they know he wasn't. You say, well, what happened? I'm going to talk to you tonight. Let me give you his whole name. His whole name is King James Stewart. Now, I used to spell it like this, Stewart. You can spell it both ways, but when I was in Scotland, that is how they spell it there, Stewart. And you know what a steward is? He's a servant. And so now what he was King James the Sixth of Scotland. He was King James the First of England. I'm going to give you 4 dates that are very important in his life. He was born June 19th. Just missed a famous birthday. Yes, sir. In 1566, he became King of Scotland at the age of 13 months. Like, hey, what'd you get for your year-old birthday? A country. Anyway, he became King of Scotland on July 29th, 1567. At that time, he was then known as King James the Sixth. The reason he was King James the Sixth, you guys understand how that works? There were 5. Scotland had 5 kings by the name of James, so he was the 6th one to be named James. He became King of England March 24th, 1603. And England had never had a King James before, so he was King James the Sixth of Scotland, but he was King James the First of England. And then he died March 27th, 1625. So that's just some information. And I want to talk to you about this man. I call him the great man. I just call him the great man, okay? And I'm going to talk to you about this. He was a King James Stewart. And I want to show you how he lived up to all 3 of those. He was first a king. As a king, let me give you some of the information on him. Here's what the people that knew him said. He was highly intelligent, he had an excellent memory, and he was an easy learner. By the time he was 16 years old, he had memorized the histories of most nations. Now, let me explain something about monarchs in his day. Most of them were illiterate. You say, why? Why do we educate our kids? So they can go up the ladder and get a better job, right? I mean, we tell him, you could be president someday. Well, when you're king, where do you go from there? Yeah. And that's why kings and queens were very illiterate people. They had readers. People read to them. King James had readers. He would be eating them. He loved to read, and he loved books. And he loved it so much that while he was eating, he read a great deal. But while he was eating, he'd have somebody stand behind him reading a book. But he himself was very educated. He spoke English, Scottish, Latin, Greek, French, Spanish, and Italian. He studied the Protestant reformers, the Augsburg Confession, the French and Swiss Protestant churches, the classics, the devotionals, the histories, science, military science, and the Bible. This is what was said of him. When he was 8 years old, he could read a chapter out of the Latin Bible out loud and then translate it to French. Then translate the French to English. He was one of the wisest, one of the smartest kings England's ever had. He had 2 tutors, and one of them was a guy by the name of Peter Young. Peter Young was one of the... You see, here's what happened. Because he took this country when he was 13 months old, obviously they couldn't let him run it until he was 2. And so there were regents that ran Scotland. They ran it for him. And of course, he had to be brought up. And one of his tutors was Peter Young, and this guy was a protege of Theodore Beza. You say, who's that? It was Beza's Greek New Testament the King James translator used for the King James Bible. And he was saucy. He was tough. I'm telling you, the guy was tough. Now, he had some physical handicaps. He had a disease. I can't remember the name of it now. They called it the Royals disease. But he was bow-legged. He walked very awkwardly. And his tongue was too big for his mouth. Now, that sounds funny, but it affected his speech. He would drool, okay? But when he was 5 years old, the assembly of regents who were ruling his country, okay? He's the king. He's been the king for 4 years. And he told them, now can you imagine a 5-year-old stand up talking to Congress? Okay? Because that's what he was doing. He was talking to the rulers because he's the ruler and he knows he's 5, so you guys are making decisions for me. And he said they ought to be very careful because he said, you will answer to God and to me afterwards. A 5-year-old. His mother was Mary Queen of Scots. She was not Bloody Mary of England's fame, but she was Mary Queen of Scots. She killed her share of Protestants too. In fact, here's an amazing thing. You have this history of Scotland, and it's Roman Catholic. They're all Roman Catholics, and here's Mary, Queen of Scots. And then comes King James. And these guys were Presbyterian. So King James was a Protestant. I won't even say he's Presbyterian. He wasn't fond of the Presbyterians. He was a king, and he believed in the divine right of kings. He believed in a monarchy. He didn't like a corporate decision. That's why he didn't like the Presbyterian form of church. But after him, his son Charles I went back to the Roman Catholic Church. You know what I'm telling you? I am telling you there was this one little brief time in history between 1603 and 1625 when England could produce the Protestant Bible. And it was all this guy. Before him was Catholic, after him was Catholic. There was question about his mother's, whether his father was his father. That's why they tried to bring charges against Mary Queen of Scots. In fact, his father was murdered while she was right in front of her, Mary Queen of Scots, while she was expecting him. They were hoping that she would miscarry. He rejected Roman Catholicism at age 11. Now, I don't mean he was Catholic until then, but at that time, he just looked it over. The guy, I'm telling you, the kid was a reader. At age 22, he debated a famous Jesuit by the name of James Gordon 5 times and beat him every time. So as a king, he was, the Bible says where the word of a king is, there is power. And so King James was indeed a monarch. He was a king. Now look, you're going to read history and they're going to say, well, he did this. Well, he did this. Do you ever have a president? I mean, when you have one that you actually wanted in the White House, didn't he do something you said, I wish he hadn't? Sure. Yeah. You know, here's our problem. We say all men are sinners, but we want Jesus Christ as president. Yeah. And I got news for you. If we got him, we'd still complain. Yeah. All right? So how do you know? Because when he does rule at the end of 1,000 years, man's going to want to get rid of him. Right. That's how I know. Right. And so as king, he was a king. Here's what happened. He became king in 1603. I've had people say this, well, he only did the Protestant Bible because he was forced to. Nobody forced him to. You didn't force, at 5 years old, a guy talks to a bunch of grown-ups like that, you're going to force him to do something? But you know when he decided to do the King James Bible? In 1604. That's almost as soon as he got on the throne. And what it was the Puritans came together and they wanted a Bible. They wanted you know the funny thing about this, I have to laugh. These guys pushing this Geneva Bible, they say this was the Bible of the Pilgrims in 1620. That's true. That's true. This was the Bible of the Pilgrims. This is the one that had the Mayflower. And then they say, and this is the Bible on which America was founded. Guys, the last Geneva was printed in 1650. That would make the newest Geneva Bible in 1776 120 years old. You think nobody had a Bible younger than 120 years old? The Geneva was the Bible that Pilgrims came over the Mayflower. And they may have had some King James, but they let's just say they were Puritans, so they had a Geneva. But the King James is the Bible that our country is founded on. But here's the funny thing. These guys that are pushing this Geneva Bible, they're saying, we need to go back to the Geneva. And they're all Calvinists. They're all reformers. Yeah. You know why we have a King James Bible? Because the Calvinists, the Puritans, didn't want the 1599. They rejected it. They went to the king and in 1604, and they said, we want a Bible. And he said, okay. But here's what he did. Now, I'm going to tell you what, a question that comes up. I have people ask me this. They'll say, why the King James Bible? And my answer to that is, I don't know. Because you ought not to answer something when you don't know the answer, okay? Sometimes we think, oh, if I don't have the answer, I'm going to look dumb. No, you're going to look dumb if you try to make one up. Okay, you do a lot better just say, I don't know. I had somebody tell me this one time. He said, you know this, they all try to act intelligent. And he goes, why not before the King James? Why not before 1611? Why not after? Why'd it have to be the King James? And he said, it's just so unreasonable. I just can't accept that it could be the King James. And I said, you don't have the faith to believe something so unreasonable, right? Yes. He said, it's so foolish. I said, you wouldn't believe anything unreasonable. He goes, no. I said, but you believe you're going to go through the air without an airplane at the sound of a trumpet, right? And he went, yeah. I said, sounds pretty unreasonable to me. Yeah. I said, you believe somebody walked on water, don't you? Yeah. I said, you believe somebody raised the dead. You believe that it rained manna for 40 years, 6 days a week, right? I said, look, I'm going to tell you something, guys. I'm going to be very honest. Believing the King James Bible is the absolute perfect Word of God is unreasonable and foolish. But it's way down on a list of unreasonable, foolish things I believe. Yeah. Say like what? Like somebody died on a cross 2,000 years ago and still paid for my sins when I wasn't even a thought. Yes. You say, oh, that just didn't make any sense. Nope, it doesn't. And look at how many things we believe that don't make any sense. Correct? Right. But here's the thing. I have people say, well, why the King James? I don't know. Just let me tell you two things about the King James that are pivotal. Number one is the English language. English, really, it was a fluid language. There's Old English, Middle English, and English, modern English. You think because of the these and thous that the King James Bible is Old English. That is not Old English. It's actually one of the first modern English translations. In the understandable history, I have have two examples. I have an example of Old English. I have an example of Middle English. You couldn't understand either one of them. I was in Ireland, and the best thing I can relate it to is Gaelic. It's almost like Gaelic. It's all the same letters. It's like they dropped the Scrabble board, okay, and couldn't put them all back where they belonged. And so your King James Bible is not an Old English translation. If it was Old English, you couldn't read it. If it was Middle English, you couldn't read it. It is a modern English translation. But up until the 17th century, and you understand the 17th century is the 1600s. Okay? Up until the end of the 16th century and the beginning of the 17th century, there were some pronoun changes that had to come to solidify the English language. That didn't happen until right around 1600, and then, look what happened in 1604. So as soon as the language was ready, God got the project going. I'm not saying that's the reason. But every English Bible prior to the King James was an English that was still not solidified. The language was still not solidified. The King James Bible is the first English Bible in a solid English language. But then I say this too. Every Bible prior to the King James was either a one-man or one-group translation. William Tyndale, was the translator of the Tyndale. Miles Coverdale was the translator of the Coverdale. Cranmer. I want to say, I think the Great Bible was done by Coverdale. So it was a one-man Bible, but it was also a one-group Bible. The Bishop's Bible was called that because that was the Anglican Bible. The Geneva Bible was the Bible of the Puritans. Now, if you want the best way you can think about Anglicans and Puritans, think Republicans and Democrats. Okay? In other words, that's how they felt. Well, here's what happened with the King James. Because I've had people say, they said, well, the King James Bible was there was a great preacher some years ago. I'm not going to say where in Hammond, Indiana that he pastored. But he made this statement. He said the King James Bible translators were a bunch of Episcopalian baby sprinklers. No, they weren't. Episcopalian, he was talking about Church of England. No, they weren't. The King James translators were a group of Anglicans picked by King James and a group of Puritans. You know what that meant? That meant that the Anglicans saw to it that it wasn't a Puritan translation, and the Puritans saw to it that it wasn't an Anglican translation. The fact is, guys, some of those Anglicans would have rather burned some of those Puritans at the stake than translate a Bible with them. You say, well, then how do we ever get a perfect Bible? It'd take a miracle. Yeah, it would. Yes. Yeah, it would. In fact, remind me if I forget. Remind me to tell you about this guy. I'm gonna forget. Bart Ehrman. Okay. Just remind me to tell you about him, and we'll talk about miracles. So he was indeed a king. As James, we know James was a supplanter, right? I mean, he snatched the king, the birthright from his brother, did he not? He plucked the thrones of Scotland and England from the Roman Catholic Church. He supplanted them. You got to understand, Henry VIII threw the Catholic Church out and established his own church. That's where the Church of England came from. Basically, the Church of England is a mirror of the Roman Catholic Church, except instead of Rome, it's London. Instead of the Pope, it's the King or Queen of England. This is an interesting thing. We're in Scotland when the Queen visited Scotland. And somebody said she is the head of the Church of England until she crosses the border into Scotland. Then she is the head of the Church of Scotland, which is a Presbyterian church. Because when she's in there, she's there. She can't be the head of the Anglican Church when she's in Scotland. That's what they told us up there. But anyway, the Roman Catholic Church, from the day that Henry VIII threw them out and established the Church of England, you understand they wanted it back. And the way to get it back is to put somebody on the throne that is a Roman Catholic. And that's why many of the attempts on his life were by Roman Catholics. It was by the Roman Catholic Church. In fact, you want to see three very pertinent dates. 1603, he became James the First of England, right? That's when he took the throne. In 1604, he commissioned the Authorized Version, or the King James Bible. You know what happened, or almost happened in 1605? In 1605, a Roman Catholic who was serving in Parliament got a letter. They're going to open Parliament on 1605. It was going to open on November 5th. And this Catholic was told, don't show up for the opening of Parliament. And he suspected something. He was a loyal English citizen, even though a Roman Catholic. And so he alerted security, and they went down into the basement of the Parliament building, and they found a guy by the name of Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes was in the basement, and they said he was standing next to a pile of faggots. Now, faggots are something that you burn.
Yes.
All seems to make sense to me. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, now imagine you find a guy in the basement of the Capitol building, and there's a room filled with logs. But there's a fuse running under the logs. A fuse that you light. They call it slow match, is what they called it. They said they found him with slow match. And they started moving the wood, and they found 38 barrels of gunpowder. Thus, we have the famous gunpowder plot. And it just so happens that Guy Fawkes was a servant to Henry. His first name was Henry. He was a priest. I can't get his last name right now. Maybe it'll come to me. But he was a servant of a Jesuit priest. The Catholic Church, here's what they were going to do. They were going to blow up Parliament and the king. The king was, imagine this. Here's what you'd imagine. You ever see when they have a joint session of Congress? State of the Union, President, Supreme Court, Congress. Oh, man. If you could blow the whole place up and then in the confusion, establish who you want. And that's what the plan was. The plan was they're going to blow up Parliament, they're going to blow up the king, and they were going to put a Roman Catholic on the throne. But the gunpowder plot was thwarted. But from that day to this, they now celebrate every November 5th Guy Fawkes Day. Remember the 5th of November. There's a little poem that they say. Now I'm going to tell you something, guys. You know what burns me? I'll tell you what burns me. Stupid Americans that don't read, don't know their history, and they get it all from Hollywood.
Yeah, amen.
So they made a movie called V, and they made Guy Fawkes a hero. And this guy in this movie wore a mask. It looked like a musketeer type mask with the little thing here. And if you see these people out like Occupy Wall Street, and you'll see that strange mask, those guys are being Guy Fawkes because Hollywood made him a hero, and stupid Americans who never read think he was a hero. So anyway, prior to the King James Bible, every one of them was a one-man translation or a one-group translation, but the King James Bible wasn't either one. It wasn't. In fact, as much as we hate committees, it was done by a committee. First Bible done by a committee. Can you believe that? It would take a miracle. Yeah. By the time he was 28, he'd almost died in the womb. He'd been kidnapped twice. He resisted attempts to kidnap him 3 times and escaped 5 different plots to kidnap him. Now, you tend to get paranoid after that. I mean, really, you just tend to be a little paranoid. Give the guy some space here. Here's what one of his observers said. He faced danger and difficulties with energy and courage. He wrote a book. He's one of few guys that wrote a book. And the book he wrote was called The Basilican Dorian. Let me make sure I spell it right. Doran. I think it's this. Okay? And all this means is kingly gift. And he wrote it to his son. Trying to remember his son's name. Charles, no, I think it was Henry. And Henry died, and it made me so mad I kicked the Kleenex box over. I just get that way every now and then. I'm sorry on what comes over me. But I believe his name was, anyway, his first son died, and then Charles took over. But this was written, and what he wrote to him about was how to be a good king. Now, here in order, this is the order of importance of things he told his son. The first thing he dealt with him about was the king's relationship with God. The second one was his duties in his office. And the third one is his manners and relationships. It was never, here's how you get these guys to do what you want. He never did that. You know what's remarkable about King James? He has no bastard children. All those kings had mistresses. He had no mistress. That's part of why they use that. See? Good night. You mean if you don't have a mistress, you got to be homosexual? I mean, that's what they're implying. But all kings were, not all kings, but they tended to be immoral, and they had mistresses, and then they had all these half-breed children who were intriguing to try to get their throne because they had some kind of a line to it. He had none. He was death on the effeminate. He didn't turn when he had a problem. He didn't turn to the nobles of Scotland or England or to the Presbyterian Church. He went to the common man. And I'll tell you what he did. He united these countries. He united England, Ireland, and Scotland. Okay, so you understand something. These guys were always bashing each other's heads in. And you know what came from that? What became known as the British Empire. He laid the foundation for the British Empire. You know what's remarkable about him too? Not only are there no illegitimate children in his name, he's one of the few monarchs of England that while he was king, England didn't fight one war. You talk about a man of peace. He was indeed a man of peace. They fought no wars while he was king. This is interesting. I picked this. A lot of this information comes up from a book that I picked up while I was over in England. Now, do you know what the flag of England looks like? Bet you don't. I'm going to show you the flag of England. That's the flag of England. So no, the Union Jack. No, that's the flag of England. Do you know what the flag of Scotland looks like? The flag of Scotland looks like this. Now, you say, oh, I don't believe that. Check it out. The flag of England is a white background with a red cross across it. The flag of Scotland is a blue background, a dark blue background with a white X across it. And when he combined these countries, he had to come up with some kind of a flag that they would accept. Yeah. So he superimposed one on top of the other. The book I read said that he was the designer of the Union Jack. And that's the flag of the British Empire. It's not the flag of England. That's not the flag of Scotland. I have no idea what the little red line means, and I don't know where Ireland came out on this, okay? But it's amazing. It is amazing. You know what's amazing? How little some people do and how famous they become. and how much this guy did and how little credit he gets for it. Because the world absolutely hates him. They hate him because of that book. His third name, he was King James Stewart. And a steward is a servant, correct? In other words, they are a steward. They're responsible for something. He sought to teach his son how to be a good king. Oh, can you believe this? He wrote a tract. And you know what it was called? The Counterblast to Tobacco. He hated smoking. He hated smoking. Here's what he said. He called smoking, he wrote this in 1604. It is, quote, loathsome to the eye, hateful to the nose, harmful to the brain. Wait a minute. You say, well, yeah, they didn't know it was harmful to the brain. In 1604, no one knew it. Medicine had not proven that. I mean, in the 50s, they weren't sure of it. Loathsome, harmful to the brain, dangerous to the lungs, and in the black stinking fumes thereof, nearest resembling the horrible Stygian smoke of that pit which is bottomless. It's almost like he didn't like smoking. Here's what he said about a man who smoked. Let's see. He said, here's why they smoke. Such is the force of that natural self-love, as we cannot be content unless we imitate everything that our fellows do, and so prove ourselves capable of everything whereof they are capable, like apes, counterfeiting the manners of others to our own destruction. I told you. You're telling me somebody's going to force that guy to do something? Here's what he said about somebody who smokes, a husband. Quote, the husband shall not be ashamed to reduce thereby his delicate, wholesome, and clear-complexioned wife to that extremity that either she must also corrupt her sweet breath therewith, or else resolve to live in a perpetual stinking torment. I'm telling you. Here's what he said about salvation. He was a soul winner, and he won a Roman Catholic cousin to the Lord. And this guy said this, it hath pleased God of his infinite goodness to call me by his grace and mercy to the knowledge of my salvation. King James won him to Christ. Here's what he said about the most horrible crimes that could not be forgiven. There are some horrible crimes that ye are bound in conscience never to forgive, such as witchcraft, willful murder, incest, and sodomy. The guy was a hunter. He hunted so much that now look, because of his legs, he had trouble sitting on a horse. He made them tie him on a horse. They tied him on a horse. He hunted the woods next to the castle empty, and they had to restock it with deer. He'd have to keep restocking because he'd hunted empty. I mean, the guy was a man's man. This is a letter he wrote to the Duke of Buckingham in 1619, trying to get him saved. For the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, praying God that as you are regenerated and born in him anew, so you may rise to him and be sanctified in him forever. Here's what he said of salvation. He wrote, white garments washen in the blood of the Lamb, as St. John saith, and all that is necessary for salvation, okay? All that's necessary for salvation. What would a Catholic tell you? You're going to go to the church. All that is necessary for salvation is contained in the Scripture. Here's what he said about not being a Roman Catholic. I am no papist, and said before that he's not a papist. He said, now faith is the free gift of God, as Paul saith. It must be nourished by prayer, which is no thing but a friendly talking to God. Use oft to pray when you are quiet, especially in your bed. Here's what he said of purgatory. As for purgatory and all the trash depending thereupon, it is not worthy talking of. But as for me, I am sure there is a heaven and a hell.
Yes. Amen.
Here's what he said of the Pope. Rome shall be the seat of the Antichrist. Rome is the seat of the Antichrist. Not only that, he wrote the Pope and offered to let him join the Church of England if he'd get saved. He told the Pope, if you get saved, I'll let you join my church. And I'm not sure, I am not even sure if he wasn't just funning with him. He sought to teach his son how to be a good king and a good man. He sought to protect his people, and that's what he did. He cared about his people. He sought to propagate the gospel. That's what, guys, that's what Jamestown was all about. They came over here. They called it Jamestown because he sent them over here to propagate the gospel. Though he was the head of the Church of England and he was brought up Presbyterian, you know what he said his church membership was? He said he was a member of the pre-500 AD primitive church. You say, what's that? Basically, you're sitting in it. Yeah. Basically. He banished Roman Catholic priests and Jesuits. He argued with the Pope and with Roman Catholics. I told you he united England, Ireland, Scotland to form the British Empire and gave the world the authorized version and the British flag. So this is the guy. I tell people this. There are three great men that we owe something to. We owe our freedom to George Washington. I don't know if you are aware, but right after the Revolution, we still didn't know what to do about a government. And the powers, the guys that were kind of running the revolution, offered to make George Washington King George I of this country. And he basically said, we just fought a war to stop that. And it was George Washington. Listen, the reason we are free and independent states is that guy right there. We owe our freedom to George Washington. We owe the preservation of the Union to Abraham Lincoln. Now, I know, the guys down south. South and the South will rise again. Yeah, we'll beat them again. But let me tell you what Lincoln saw. Lincoln saw that more important than anything, look, it wasn't about slavery. The most important thing was the preservation of the Union. Here's what the Roman Catholic Church saw. It was kind of like, I'll show you something. Go to Judges 11. In Judges chapter 11, it's not Judges 11. Wait a minute. Oh, no, it's not Judges 11. It's 1 Samuel 11. 1 Samuel 11. You understand that the 12 tribes of Israel, you remember they were even beating each other's own brains out in the book of Judges? Remember when they all went to war against Benjamin? And they were kind of a disunified group, even though they were all from the children of Jacob. And when Saul became king, Nahash, the Ammonite, saw something. And he said this, if Saul unifies those 12 tribes, they're going to be a power to be reckoned with. And so he set about to destroy that before it could ever start. Here's what he did. Look at 1 Samuel 11. Then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said unto Nahash, make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. Now, guys, try to understand how things were in those days. Walls were around, cities had walls because they were protection. And you would have armies that would go around and they would conquer a village, or they'd just surround it and say, look, give us money and we won't kill you. So Nahash surrounded Jabesh Gilead and they said, look, we don't even want to fight you. We can't win. How much do we have to give you? Now, both of them win that way. Nobody from Jabesh Gilead dies, and Nahash doesn't have to take a chance of losing a battle. But he doesn't want to win a battle. He wants to put Saul on the spot. Because watch what he says. Nahash the Ammonite answered them, on this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all your right eyes and lay it for reproach upon all Israel. Imagine if this building was surrounded right now by a mass of 4,000 or 5,000 men that said they're going to kill us. And we said, look, guys, we'll give you everything in our wallets. We'll give you our checkbooks. We'll give you our credit cards if you let us go. And so they go, okay. So we say, okay, we walk out there and say, what can we give you? And they said, we want all the men to come out here, and we're going to put our knife right in here, cut these 3 muscles, cut the optic nerve, and cut the other 3 muscles. We're going to pluck you right out and stick them right there. Put a pile of your eyes right in the parking lot. And you'd know these guys are not interested in peace, and they're not interested in money. They're interested in not just to humiliate. They're using Jabesh Gilead as bait. Because watch what happens. Verse 3, and the elders of Jabesh said unto him, give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers unto all the coasts of Israel, and then if there be no man to save us, we will come out to thee. Can I ask you a question? If you had a smaller group surrounded, would you let them go? No. Let them send somebody out and say, will somebody come and attack this guy? No. But that's exactly what he wanted. Because he said this, they're going to go to Saul. And Saul's going to do one of 2 things. He's going to say, you tell him I'm coming. And I'm going to change his name just from Nahash to Hash. And you know what they'll do? They'll lay an ambush for him and kill him. Or Saul will say, I don't know what to do. And then he'll pluck out all their right eyes, and the children of Israel throw Saul out themselves. Either way, Saul loses. So, look at what happens. Then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul, and told the tidings in the ears of the people. And all the people lifted up their voices and wept. And behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field. And Saul said, what aileth the people that they weep? And they told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh. And the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard those tidings. And his anger was kindled greatly. And he took a yoke of oxen and slew them in pieces. And sent them throughout all the coasts of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen. And the fear of the Lord, fell on the people, and they came out with one consent. And when he had numbered them in Bezak, the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. And he said to the messengers that came, now watch this, thus shall you say unto the men of Jabesh Gilead. He's about to walk into a trap. Right? Okay. Tomorrow by the time that the sun be hot. Noon? Right? High noon. Man, they ought to make a movie like that. Anyway, he said, you tell the men of Jabesh Gilead, by tomorrow at noon, ye shall have help. And the messengers came and showed it to the men of Jabesh, and they were glad. All right, so look what it says. Now, here's what the men of Jabesh did. They said, tomorrow we will come out unto you, and ye shall do with us all that seemeth good unto you. And they said, nobody's coming, so I guess tomorrow, maybe tomorrow evening. But Nahash says, let's find, he probably knew he's coming at noon, but watch what it says, verse 11. And so it was on the morrow that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the host. Forced night march before the ambush could be set up. So here's what I'm telling you. Nahash saw that if this King Saul ever unites these tribes, they're going to be a nation to be reckoned with. Well, look what you had. You had Saul. Look what David did. They became the prominent world power. Under Solomon, they were even a greater power. So Nahash saw that, and he said, I got to get rid of it fast. Okay? The Union, the Catholic Church said, man, if these United States, if they ever get all the land all the way to the Pacific, and if they ever become that big, they are going to be a power to be reckoned with. I don't know if you realize the Catholic Church had a lot to do with the Civil War. And so Lincoln knew of all things, the most important thing was to preserve the Union. Now, here's what I've had people say. Well, if the South would have won, there'd be 2 strong countries. No, there wouldn't. That's right. No, there wouldn't. You know why? Because if the South won, you'd have the United States of America and the Confederate States of America until they split again. Because I heard this, that Virginia was contemplating seceding from the Confederate States about the time that the war ended. So they would have split, plus there's a whole bunch of states never would have come in, and this would have been kind of like the United States of Europe over here, never would have been the world power, never would have been the power for good. I know what we are today, but I am telling you that this country took the gospel around the world. Yes. And it's because of him. Because Abe Lincoln said, we have got to preserve the Union. And then it's this. The Bible. And we got this guy to thank for it. King James. Now, let me just explain what the charge is, the charge of homosexuality, where that came from. Let me explain something about racism. Racism has nothing to do with color. Do you know who's killing black people in Africa? Black people. You know who's killing white people in like Croatia and remember when the Bosnians and the Serbians, you know who those are? Those are white people killing white people. You say, what's the problem? Wrong tribe. That's what it is, wrong tribe. And so here, we don't see this. We don't see a difference between English and Scots. Well, the English and Scots do. And the Scots, to the English, the Scots were almost subhuman. Really, they thought they were subhuman. They weren't even human. So could you imagine how some people in England thought when they got a Scot for a king? And there was a guy in the court by the name of Anthony Weldon. Now, here's what King James did. He not only, as a Scot, became the king of England, Ireland, and Scotland, but he brought a bunch of Scots and put them in his court. Now, they said court, you'd have to think of presidential cabinet. All right, that's what the court was. But beyond that, remember this, guys. See, one of the things is that we can get anything we want here, but in those days, you were going to be a serf. You were going to be a peasant. But if you could get into the king's court, you got privilege. Your children got education that nobody else would get. So to be part of the king's court I can't explain how important it was. Anthony Weldon was English, and he was part of the king's court. But he was one of few Englishmen. Almost all of them were Scots, and he hated Scots. And I don't know if I have anything here that he wrote, but he berated the Scots. Why? I mean, while King James was on the throne, he ripped on King James, he ripped on the Scots, and you know what King James did? Put him out of the court. Brother, when he went out of the court, I mean, his whole life changed. You understand? His income level dropped. His children ceased to be privileged. I mean, this is, I can't tell you what, it's like being promoted to the president of Antarctica, okay? And what Anthony Weldon did is he swore vengeance against King James. King James died in 1625. In 1650, 25 years after he died, Anthony Weldon wrote a book in which he claimed that King James was homosexual. You say, well, maybe he was. Yeah, maybe I'll just have somebody wait till you die, and 25 years after you're dead, we'll have them write a book like that about you. Well, that's not fair. See what I'm saying? King James couldn't do anything. You know what happened when he wrote that book? Nothing. Because 25 years after King James died, there were still too many people that remembered the good king. And they knew the charges weren't valid. And nothing happened. And you know who started promoting this over here? Moody Bible Institute. Moody Bible Institute back in the 70s. I read, when I was at Massillon, I got a Moody Monthly, wrote them on this, and they resurrected this charge that he is homosexual. Why? Because they want to destroy the King James Bible. Okay? And you know who propagates this lie today? You talk to people that hate the King James Bible, and you see if they won't say he was homosexual. Because they want to destroy it. To which I say this. Number one, first, he was not. Secondly, he didn't translate anything. By the way, the NIV had Virginia Mollenkott as a final reader. She read the whole thing and approved it. She was a lesbian, a militant, open lesbian. But there was another guy, and I can't remember his name, but there was a man that was on the translation committee of the NIV who was found out to be a homosexual, and nobody disparages the NIV for that. Which shows you guys they don't care. They don't care about anybody being homosexual. They care about destroying that book. And so today they say that about him, and you saw what he said. He said, what was it? Witchcraft, willful murder, incest, and sodomy are horrible crimes that should never be forgiven. He hated effeminacy. He really did. Now, it's hard for us to say that, or to believe that, when you see the way they dressed. Because if I saw a guy dressed like that today, I'd stay away from him, okay? Big fluffy collar, little tight, little... But that's how they dress, guys. That's how they dress. Thank God we're born in the 20th century. And so people, that is the king behind the King James Bible. Let me just give you 2 scripture, and I'll be done. Go to Ecclesiastes chapter 8 and 1 Peter. Ecclesiastes chapter 8. And isn't it amazing that the Bible says this? Verse 4, where the word of a king is, there is power. Where the word of a king is. Ecclesiastes 8:4. And that's why we have a King James Bible. And then in 1 Peter, in chapter 2, verse 17 says this, honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king. And if there was ever a king that merited our honor, it is good King James. I will tell you this, there was a movie done right around the time of the 400th anniversary, 4 years ago, in 2011. I'm trying to think what it's called. I think it's called the King James Bible and its impact on the world. It is an amazing, informative movie. But the amazing thing about it is, if you ever go over there, you see kings and queens, what they do is they bury them in churches. And they bury them like right there. And they have a carving made of them lying in state. So like if they did that for Queen Elizabeth, they would have her laying like this. It looked just like Queen Elizabeth, only in stone, and that would be the stone lid to the sarcophagus that her casket is in. Do you know where King James is? He is buried, I'm trying to think of where it is, but there's a little plate about this big, and it's on the floor, and they won't even acknowledge it. There's no big monument to his burial. You know what's amazing? Remember I told you this guy's mother's name was Mary, and he was preceded by a wild man named John? That wild man was John Knox, the Presbyterian in Scotland. And John Knox is the one that got the Presbyterian church started. And we were over there at his church. We saw his grave. You know what his grave is? It's a yellow square that big in a parking space in the church parking lot. They paved over the cemetery, and where he is buried is a little yellow square. When we were there, it was parking spot number 23. Okay? And that's how Scotland said thanks to John Knox. And that's how England said thanks to King James. So guys, that's the king behind the King James Bible. These 3 men, we owe it all to these guys. This guy kept us free. This guy kept us together. But this guy gave us our Bible. And the best thing to do is read that book. Okay, preacher.
You know, when I was in high school, I loved football. And I got saved, and God completely changed